Population ecology is basically looking at what is a population. Okay, life takes place in a population. If you are an organism, a species, if you're in a whole group of the same species at the same location, that is called a population. And we're looking at what factors are going to affect how many critters are in your population. Basically, we're going to talk about all these species. This particular species all require the same resources. Why? Because they fill a particular niche. They're basically all the same, and therefore they fill a niche. How do they interact? How do they interbreed? So some of the things that affect the population size are things that are dead, abiotic, or never alive. Abiotic, such as sunlight and temperature, precipitation. That's going to influence what is alive around you. What are the soil and nutrients? It's going to be completely different for a desert than what it is going to be for a rainforest. The biotic factors are all the other things that are alive, such as prey, competitors, disease, and how do they go about interacting with you? And then there's called intrinsic factors. Intrinsic factors are your adaptations. Are you an R specialist? Are you a K species? Are you a generalist? Are you a specialist? All those things are going to affect how many critters are in your population. So when we describe a population, we have to figure out, where do you live? I mean, is a monkey that lives on the equator the same as a monkey that lives in Japan? No, completely and totally different. Also, we're going to talk about how close, what is the spacing mechanism in your population? That means, for example, a mouse has a density of maybe 20 or 30 mice per square acre, per football field. Whereas if you're a mountain lion, it may be one mountain lion for 10 to 20 square miles. Completely different density and size of your population. Where are you located? Is there anything that's going to limit you? So, for example, the temperature. Okay, you're not going to find a penguin very often at the Galapagos, or a polar bear at the Galapagos because of the temperature and so forth. What is your habitat? What are some of the adaptations that the polar bear has that a grizzly bear doesn't have? Or that a bear that lives at the equator would not have? Talk at your tables. What are some adaptations that the polar bear has? Five, four, three, two, one. Table 3. What is one of the adaptations that a polar bear has? You're table 3.
They can survive in that hole.
They can survive on the... Well, yeah, but why? That would not be a very good answer on a test. That's not describing why. What about their fur?
It's very thick.
It's very thick. Table 7. What's another reason? That's you guys.
The fur has it's like a tube.
The fur is like an optical fiber. It's hollow. And therefore the light goes through the hollow tube to its black skin. Does the polar bear spend its time awake during the winter? No, it hibernates. Those are some of the adaptations that it has to the polar biome. Would the same critter need that on the equator? No. Likewise, does the parrots, what are some of the adaptations a parrot has to have? Because it's in a rainforest. Has to be able to stand 12 hours a day, every single day of the year, sunlight. has to be able to handle the heat, handle all the precipitation, all those things. Sometimes the environment changes. The range expands or contracts. For example, the sequoia is up in Sequoia National Park. Why? Because at its elevation, it's fairly wet. It's like a bog. A lot of moisture in that area. And therefore, it has roots that go way out sideways to support its very tall tree. Now, if it starts drying up in that area, will the sequoia be able to migrate? No. And therefore, that's one of the things that we need to take into consideration. Because of the changing environment, the sequoia grove may change to a white birch grove, to an aspen grove, and eventually from a evergreen to a deciduous tree, depending on what is happening to that biome. How many trees do you see in the upper left-hand corner in the aspen? One. In an aspen grove, typically what happens is it starts with one tree, and when the roots go down, they go out from that main tree, maybe 20, 30 feet away, and it comes up, and it's the same tree. If you go over by Flagstaff, I had a student a couple of years ago ask me, why, Dr. E, do all the trees lose their leaves at the same time? And I said, is it an aspen? Yeah, because the tree, that grove of tree, basically all the leaves are getting ready to fall, and they fall at the same day. How are your organisms spaced? If you look in the upper left-hand corner, that's clumped. That is typically definitely for prey, so that it confuses the predator, such as the fish as a flock of birds, but it also is the same for predators. Because a lot of predators go in clumps because that way they're in a pack so that they can attack the prey. Sometimes critters are fairly uniform. They're uniform, meaning they're about 6 feet apart. Very common in birds, like penguins. Why? Because they need to be close so they can warm up. In the winter, they basically form a crowd where they're really close together. But during nesting season, they're going to be uniformly spaced so that they have room to nest, and so that their neighbors don't get too close. Because if they get too close, those nasty beaks are going to stab at their neighbors. Sometimes the organism is completely and totally random, where it's wherever the seed lands is where the tree is going to grow, or where the dandelion is going to grow. So, why would a species be clumped? Would you be able to answer that question on a test? Why has evolution selected this behavior? Would you be able to answer that? It's a safety net. Basically, it confuses the predator. It makes it so that, and sometimes when it confuses the predator, they don't get any prey. Plus, it's also, oh well, George died. Who cares? No one liked him anyway. Yeah, yes.
How does it confuse the predators?
Because they don't stay in one part. Especially fish schools. They keep on going in a circle, where they don't stay in one spot. They're following the leader, but they keep on moving around. And therefore, it just, I'm going for that. No, that's not there. Where is the one that I was going for? Uniform, again, it's uniform because they're territorial. I want my area, if you get too close to me, I'm going to try to beat the living daylights out of you. Okay? But at the same time, being territorial, they're able to protect each other. Random is, who cares? They just go where they want to. The dandelion, wherever those seeds land, that's where it's going to start growing. Population size. How do we change a population size? It shows you in the picture up there. We can have birth or immigration. We do that. When we do that, we have an increase in population. When we remove critters, they die or they emigrate with the E, which is exiting. Now, population growth rate changes depending on what is the ratio to male to females. If you only have one male and 20 females, does that matter? Versus 20 males, 20 females. Is there going to be a different growth rate with those two ratios? Generation time. If you have a generation time of 15 years versus 30 years, the one that has 15 years will double in population in 30 years. They will have 2 times that they reproduce. Whereas the one that has 30 will only have 1 reproduction cycle. And therefore, the 15 years will grow much more rapidly. And the age structure. Where are most of the kids? What is the reproductive age for the females? Is it at 6 months? Or 16 years? Or 60 years? Some other things that determine it are the growth of and decline of the populations. Looking at vital statistics for this ground squirrel. If we look at it, if we look at the males versus the females, can you see it continues down until about year 5 or 6 for the poor males when there aren't any left. Whereas the females last out to 9 to 10 years. Look at the death rate. The guys die much, much faster, maybe because they're out carousing a lot more. I don't know. The life expectancy is about 1/3 longer for the females. It's 1.33 for the females versus 1.07 for males. They're not expected to live as long. I did not put that thing about the teenage boys and insurance rates. But it's also true. Why do teenage boys have such high insurance rates? They crash a heck of a lot more. They're out. You guys are out taking risks a lot more than some of us older guys. And because of the risk, there's sometimes more chance that you may not survive. Now, survivorship curves. This is looking at how many are left at a certain amount of time. Notice that the females survive a heck of a lot longer than the males do in this case. That's one way of looking at it. We'll see another one in a few minutes. Another survivorship. It's basically looking at how many survive per unit time. This is called an age structure. On an age structure, this is typically done with human populations. The way that you read this thing is that right down here is different lifespans. Generally, each layer is 5 years. On the left-hand side are males, and females are always right. Pun intended. If we look at this, if we look at those right there, if we look at that, that's the reproductive years. If we look at Kenya, what is happening to the young kids? Are they surviving a long time? No. There's a high infant mortality rate or a child mortality rate. If we look at the center one, the United States, that is almost zero population growth. Why? Because it is basically vertical up until about age 30. Above age 30 is is called, what is that called? The baby boomers. Why did that happen? Well, during World War II, for about 4 guys were deployed over in the war. The women were back here. They got back, they were very lonely. And so for the next 5 to 10 years, there were a lot of babies born. Okay, and that's what the baby boomer. If we look at Italy, what's happening there is negative population growth. There's fewer young than there are reproductive, and that is going to continue. That's great because it means that there are going to be a decrease in the number of people in Italy over the next several years. It also causes a problem because not always will we have people that will want the jobs that other people don't want. Okay, recently, because of immigration no-nos, not allowing immigration, there's been a big problem in the Midwest in dairy farms. Because the average American doesn't want to go out and milk cattle. And therefore, because we don't have the immigrants, a lot of those dairy farms are going belly up. Questions? Also in there, can you find the percentage of the population that are 0 to 5 years old in Kenya? That's about 8% female, 8% male. Are there always as many males as there are females? If we look at older people in Italy, in the United States, are there as many males as there are females? No. The orange line right there was the pink is the reproductive years, the green was the pre-reproductive years. Questions on that? If we look at this survivorship curve, it's looking at 3 types of species. Notice on here, it is not implying whatsoever that the hydra, oyster, and human live the same number of years. It's just for humans, it is approximately 100 years as maximum age. For hydra, it may be 6 months. A year, 2 years. Oyster, same thing. A year, 2 years. But with the oyster, what's going to happen is that they have tons and tons of babies. But very, very few of them. If you look at it, out of 1,000 babies, only 1% survive. 10% of the lifespan. Therefore, the vast majority of them die. Why? Because they just throw sperm and egg out into the ocean water and hopefully that they come together. Hydra is basically an interesting one is because it has a fairly good reproductive style, but it just dies off as it dies off. In random dying. Not all at once. Whereas humans, we spend a lot of time taking care of our youth. So when we're younger, it's not until we start running out of juice at about age 60 that we start dying off. Again, the hydra is constant mortality throughout lifespan. And 3, we have very high mortality at the beginning, but the ones that stay around live much longer. Now, number 1 is basically we don't start dying off until we're past reproductive years. So, what is the cost of having sex, reproduction, versus survival? If we increase the amount of reproduction, spend a lot more energy on that, we may decrease survival. If you have babies very, very young, and spend a lot of time taking care of them, that's a lot of energy. And how many reproductive cycles do you have per lifetime? Humans is once a month. Mice is basically once or twice a year they can get, 2 or 3 times per year they can get pregnant. Some species it's once a year. Okay? And all that's going to determine how much it's going to cost you. Is it going to cost you the same to have all those seeds going out versus having 2 cubs? No. The reproductive strategy is very important also. Are you case selected, meaning you have late reproduction? We wait till about 15, 20, 25, with my daughter, hopefully 40 or 50. That's how all dads feel, until they have kids. We have few offspring, but we spend a lot on you guys. The average now for the United States is somewhere around $500,000 per kid. No kidding. In primates, coconuts, and so forth, we're case strategists. Our strategist basically early reproduction, many offsprings, very little parental care, and they die. Insects and plants are that way. Questions? Some of the trade-offs. The more offspring we have, the more critters there's going to be. But because we're not taking great care of them, they may not live very long. But all those offspring, what does it do to the parents? Does it take a lot of energy from them? Or taking care of just 1 or 2? Is that going to increase your energy or decrease your energy? Your survival. The R-selected are the ones that just don't care. Case selected lasts a long time. Here, the case strategists are the ones that live the long time. R-selection are where they don't. Way to help remember it is R-selection is all about reproduction. They have kids frequently, but don't care after they have the kids. Case strategist is you keep them, and you keep on taking care of them, and you last a long time. Now, what are some of the math that you're going to be dealing with? The number of people in your population. Say you start with 100, and you have 10 births out of those 100, and you have 5 people immigrate into the area. And then you have 4 deaths and 2 people leave. Can you figure out what is the population now? Fairly easy, straightforward. A little bit more sophisticated is looking at this, where you're looking at the number of critters. Your rate of growth is R. Intrinsic would be what it is overall in versus time, where dNdt is the change in number per unit time is equal to the rate of growth times what you were to begin with. So if you're changing your number, if you have 100 critters in your group and your growth rate is 10%, that means the next year you will have 10 new critters. And the following year you would have another 11 critters. And then you'd have 12 critters. And so forth, because it would be 10% times the new population. Questions? And if you notice here, if you only have 3 offspring, are you going to increase your population as fast as if you have 4 offspring? No. Now, this J-shaped curve is an exponential curve. What the heck does it mean? Let me ask you this question. Which would you rather do? Earn $10,000 a day for a month, or get paid a penny a day, then 2 pennies the next day, and then 4 pennies, 8 pennies, and so forth? Which one would you prefer? The second one, because you end up something like $10 million. Okay, that's exponential growth, where you keep on increasing it exponentially. Now, if we look at exponential growth, it sometimes happens with case-selected species. Most of the time, it does not. Why would these be able to go that fast? Why? Because the African elephant, after it became protected from poaching, it started increasing in numbers. And because it had all this area of food, it was able to increase its numbers fairly rapidly. Same thing with the whooping crane. It was near extinction back in 1940, but once it was protected, its numbers went up rapidly. So what limits a population? Some things like density dependent. If you've got too many critters, are you going to have, if the density of your population is too high, is it going to affect how much food you have available? And so the more dense your population, the less food you have available. The more dense your population, you're going to have problems finding mates, nesting sites, etc. Whereas density independent would be those things such as sunlight. Is the sunlight ever going to be dependent on how many critters you have in your population? Or the rain or the storms? Those are going to happen whether you have a large population or a small population. Those are not going to be affected by your population. It's just going to happen. Basically, this is just repeating the same thing, where the density dependent are those things that make you compete for resources and make you more vulnerable for diseases. For example, if you live in Idaho or Montana, where they've got 200,000 people total, are you as likely to get sick as you are living in downtown LA? Why? Because you're not going to come around people as often, therefore you're not going to spread disease. Whereas density independent factors, again, it's the flood's going to happen whether you got your critters there or not. The tsunami, the drought, the earthquake, all those things are going to happen whether you've got 1 critter per mile or 2,000 critters per mile. It's going to still happen. So, could you identify and describe how one density-independent factor can reduce monarch butterfly populations? Could you basically talk about one density-dependent? One density-independent, we're having a drought. If we have a drought, what happens to the trees that they basically lay their eggs on? What happens to the milkweed if we're having a drought? Is that dependent on how many monarchs we have? No. However, would density-dependent factor affect, if we have too many, is it going to affect, I can't find anyone to mate with. I can't find any, if we got too many, we're going to run out of food. Now, under conditions, under normal conditions, we can have, under ideal conditions, we can have logistic or exponential growth. If there is infinite amount of food, it's going to keep on increasing forever and ever and ever. But that's not possible. Why? Because there's something called the carrying capacity. The carrying capacity is dependent on all the abiotic, all the things that you cannot control. The amount of food, the conditions around you. And therefore, most organisms are going to stop when they get to the carrying capacity. Basically, if we look at carrying capacity, if you're beyond the carrying capacity, you're eating everything up. And so if you start eating too much, what's going to happen to your numbers? You're going to die off. And so the seal is a case strategist. Because it's a case strategist, it's not going to have huge numbers of offspring, and therefore as it reaches the carrying capacity, it's slowly going to get there. Therefore, it's not going to overshoot it. The Daphnia, the one on the bottom, it has tons and tons of babies. If there's a lot of food, all those babies are going to survive, and therefore it's going to wipe out all the food it has. And then, they're going to start dying because there's not enough food. So the K strategist is the one on the left called carrying capacity with a K. The R strategist is on the right. Why? Because they have a boom and a bust. There's tons of babies, and all of them start eating the food around them. And then they start dying off because all the food is gone. Now, sometimes the carrying capacity can change. With the snowshoe hare and the lynx, what's happening there is as the number of snowshoe hare start going up, 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 what's going to happen is the number of lynx can start going up too. And therefore the carrying capacity goes up. However, as the lynx go up, what happens to the number of snowshoe hare? It goes down. Therefore the carrying capacity for the lynx goes down. Are there any questions on that? The human population is plagued, but basically right now we're in exponential growth. Why? Because we've got over the Black Plague. We reached 500,000 people back around 1650. Then about 1780 we had the Industrial Revolution and we started going nuts. Then we started getting a lot of medical breakthroughs. When we got the medical breakthroughs, when a country gets medical breakthroughs, its population can go nuts because it's still having trying to have 12 kids, but instead of only 2 surviving, all 12 of them survive. And therefore the population goes nuts. In 2005, we finally reached 6 billion people. As of today, we are something like 7.8 billion people. Okay? Growing too fast. We're adding over 82 million people per year, which is basically 10 La Cañadas per day, worldwide. Are we going to reach the carrying capacity for humans? Let's hope not. One of the things you do need to realize is of that 6 million, approximately a third of it is in China and India. Now, where is our growth? If you look, developed countries have leveled off. Developing countries are still going strong. Why? Because they're starting to get better medical, but they're still in the mind span that all of our kids are going to die. But that's not all the problem. The problem is also we have uneven distribution of resources. If we look at our future, if we continue the way that we're growing right now, we will hit 14 billion by the year 2100. We're at 7 billion right now. What are we doing to our planet? Yeah, we're breaking it. What the ecological footprint means is if everyone on the planet lived the way you did, how many planets would we need to sustain us? And if everyone on the planet lived the way we in the United States lived, we would need 30 planets to keep us all alive. The wealthiest 20% of the people in the world take in 86% of all goods. If in the vast majority of the world, if you make less than something like $20,000 to $25,000 a year, you're wealthy. If you make more than that, $25,000 a year, which is poor in the United States, you're in the top 1% of the world. If you make more than $25,000. And if you look here, this is basically looking at how much do we use. And a lot of the countries, if you look back there, are using more than their share. They're in deficit. They're not getting it. They're using more than what they can take in. Are there questions?